Mill blamed me, saying I messed it up after I had a miscarriage. Then my SIL announced her pregnancy at a family luncheon, said she would name her baby after my late daughter as a tribute, using the exact name we had chosen. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to breathe, tried to process what was happening around me. But the air in the room felt heavy, like I couldn't escape the weight of it. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, while my heart cracked open all over again. It had been months since we lost our baby, and yet it felt like the wound was as fresh as the night we rushed to the hospital. It still stung, this ache that never seemed to go away. I looked around the room, at the faces of family members, all of them smiling, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. The chatter, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into white noise. And there she was, my sister-in-law, standing in the center, her face glowing with excitement. She was glowing, as if she hadn't just turned my world upside down. She hadn't even paused to consider the pain I was carrying. I felt my chest tighten, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure if I should speak, if I could speak. My husband, Roger, standing beside me, reached for my hand. I could feel his grip tightening, his knuckles white as he tried to stay calm. His face mirrored my own turmoil. He didn't have to say anything for me to know how deeply this cut him too. The room grew quieter, their murmurs fading into the background as my sister-in-law cleared her throat and stood up a little straighter, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke. "I have something important to share," she said, her voice almost too bright. "I'm pregnant." I should have been happy for her. I should have smiled and offered my congratulations. But the words hung in the air, cold and bitter. Her eyes flicked to me, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. And in that moment, I realized that the announcement wasn't just about her new life. It was about using mine, about turning my grief into her triumph. "And," she continued, her voice still too sweet, "we've decided to name the baby after my brother's late child. Mika, if it's a girl, or Michael, if it's a boy. It's a tribute to them. I thought it would be a nice way to honor what you lost." It felt like the room spun around me. My heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. My thoughts scattered, confused, disoriented. A tribute. She didn't even ask us how we felt about it. She didn't care. To her, this was just a clever way to attach herself to our pain, to stake her claim in something that was never hers. My daughter's name, the name we had chosen with so much love and hope, was now being used as a token in her personal narrative. I glanced at Roger, my chest tightening as I saw the fire in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched, his hand squeezing mine harder. He wanted to protect me, to protect our lost daughter, but we were trapped in this unbearable moment, a moment that should have been about family support and sympathy, not a contest for attention. I whispered, unable to stop the question that had been eating away at me. "Why would you do this?" Her response was almost casual. "I just thought it would be nice. A way to keep their memory alive, you know. It felt right." I couldn't believe it. I felt sick, my stomach churning with the overwhelming mix of emotions that flooded me. Anger, disbelief, hurt. This was a sick joke. It wasn't a tribute. It was a power move. It was her way of claiming something from me, from us. As if we owed her this honor, as if she deserved to take something we could never have back. "Roger," I said, my voice trembling now. "This isn't right." He squeezed my hand again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know." But the words didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. Our grief had been overshadowed, replaced by her selfishness. I could feel my heart breaking all over again, this time not just for the child we lost, but for the family that should have been our support, and was instead tearing us apart from the inside. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't stand the thought of hearing her talk about her ring. honoring our daughter, while she didn't even acknowledge the depth of our pain. Roger finally spoke up, his voice firm, filled with raw anger. You don't get to do this. You don't get to take our daughter's name, to act like this is some kind of tribute, when you've never cared about what we've been through. But his words didn't make a dent. His mother, my mother-in-law, immediately jumped in, defending her daughter, brushing off the pain we were feeling as if it was just a minor inconvenience. It's a beautiful gesture, she said with a forced smile, her voice dripping with condescension. You should be grateful. Grateful? How could I be grateful for the theft of my daughter's name? For the erasure of my grief in favor of their celebration? How could anyone be grateful for that? I stood there, paralyzed, watching as my mother-in-law wrapped my sister-in-law in a hug, congratulating her like nothing had happened, like our pain didn't matter at all. It was a betrayal, one I wasn't sure I could ever forgive. Roger's voice broke through my thoughts, shaking with anger. No, we're done with this. He turned to me, his hand finding mine once more, and he led me away from the table, away from the family that had just torn us apart. Outside the air was colder than it had been inside, and I could finally take a deep breath. But even that didn't bring relief. The pain of what had just happened was too fresh, too raw. I didn't know how we would recover from this, how we would heal from the wreckage they had left behind. But I knew one thing: we couldn't keep letting them do this to us. Not anymore. The days that followed were a blur. Roger and I barely spoke about what happened at the family lunch. Neither of us knew how to approach the situation without it turning into another painful argument. The silence between us grew heavier, suffocating. I didn't know where to begin, or if I even wanted to. The memory of my sister-in-law's announcement was like a constant, gnawing presence. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, heard her words, felt the sting of the betrayal again. The loss of our daughter had already shattered everything we thought we knew about our family, about love, about the future. But this felt like a betrayal I hadn't been prepared for. I didn't know how to carry it. We had barely spoken to my family since the miscarriage, too. It wasn't that they didn't care. My parents were wonderful. They checked in regularly, made sure I was eating and sleeping, offered gentle encouragement to go back to work or to do something other than sit in my grief. But the pain of losing our baby still felt like a weight in my chest, a constant companion, and I didn't know how to explain it to anyone. Not even my parents. It was different with Roger, though. I felt like he understood. We didn't need words, we just had the silence between us. He didn't force me to talk when I wasn't ready. He didn't ask me to stop crying when the grief threatened to overwhelm me. But the longer the silence stretched between us, the more I began to feel like I was sinking into it. There was no release. No way out. And then, the call started coming. At first, it was just a few family members checking in, asking how we were doing, offering their condolences. But soon, it became clear that the news of my sister-in-law's pregnancy was all anyone was talking about. Even people I hadn't heard from in years started sending texts, offering their congratulations, not to me, but to her. It was almost as if they had forgotten we had lost a child. Or maybe it was just easier for them to move on, to celebrate the new life she was bringing into the world, while we were left to mourn the one we would never get to meet. I remember one night, my phone buzzed with a message from my aunt. She asked if we were okay, but before I could reply, she added a note. I hope you're feeling better now that the family has some good news. That was the first time I snapped. I didn't reply. The words sat there, taunting me, as if my grief was just a temporary inconvenience, as if the loss of my daughter was something I should simply get over now that my sister-in-law in-law was pregnant. It wasn't a matter of moving on. It was a matter of surviving, of learning to live with the unbearable weight of what we'd lost. Roger and I had been avoiding family events, not because we didn't want to be there for them, but because it was too painful. Every time we walked into a room full of people who were happy and hopeful, it felt like we were carrying a burden no one else could see. And that's when the invitations started coming from my sister, asking us to come to family gatherings, trying to force us back into the fold. She'd texted Roger about a family lunch, an event she insisted we attend, saying it was important, that everyone was looking forward to seeing us. Roger didn't want to go. I could tell. He didn't say it, but I could feel it in the way he walked around the house, in the way he refused to talk about it. But we both knew we couldn't avoid it forever. Eventually, we'd have to face it. So we agreed to go, not because we wanted to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. It was supposed to be a casual lunch, a way to reconnect with family. But nothing to have prepared me for what was about to happen. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Everyone was chatting, eating, laughing. It was the same as any other family gathering. But the moment my sister-in-law stood up to announce her news, everything shifted. The room seemed to pause, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for her to speak. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice almost too sweet, too rehearsed. I froze. Roger, beside me, was already tense, his hand gripping mine tighter than usual. We hadn't discussed how we'd react, but I felt it in his touch. He was already bracing himself for the worst. And then, she dropped the bomb. "And we've decided to name the baby after my brother's late child." She continued, with that same fake sweetness. "Mika, if it's a girl, Michael, if it's a boy, it's a tribute to them. We wanted to honor the memory." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could hear the clapping, the excitement, the congratulations that followed. But it was all a blur. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't a tribute. It wasn't a beautiful gesture. It was a power move. A way for her to stake a claim on something that had always been mine and Roger's. Our baby's name, the name we had chosen for our daughter, the name we had dreamed of saying aloud, now belonged to her. As if she could take our grief and wear it like a badge of honor. Roger's grip on my hand tightened. I could feel his anger rising, his disbelief turning into frustration. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to tell everyone how cruel and insensitive this was. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not in front of everyone. Not when it would only make the situation worse. I turned to Roger, my voice barely a whisper. "Why is she doing this?" His response was tight, his jaw clenched. "I don't know." But his eyes spoke volumes. He was hurt. He was angry. And he was just as shocked as I was. We stayed silent through the rest of the lunch, trying to force ourselves to smile and nod, pretending like everything was fine. But nothing felt fine. Not after what had just happened. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to process the pain. The humiliation? The anger? All I knew was that my grief was not my own anymore. It was hers to share, hers to manipulate, hers to turn into a convenient story. And I hated her for it. The days following the lunch were a blur. We didn't speak much, Roger and I. The anger, the hurt, it was all still too fresh, and neither of us had the words to process it. We didn't talk about the pregnancy announcement, or the name. We didn't talk about how my sister-in-law's words had cut us, deeper than we could ever explain. The silence between us grew thicker with each passing hour. And I found myself retreating into myself more and more. The weight of the grief I was already carrying now compounded by the betrayal I couldn't shake. I didn't want to be around anyone. The thought of seeing my sister-in-law or my mother-in-law In-law again made my stomach turn. I couldn't face them. Not after what had happened. Not after they had used our pain for their own gain. But then came the phone calls. At first, they were simple. Well-meaning messages from family members. People who had heard about the miscarriage and just wanted to make sure we were doing okay. But it wasn't long before the tone shifted. The congratulations started pouring in from my sister-in-law. Everyone was so excited for her. Everyone was so happy for her. And no one, it seemed, even remembered that we had lost a child just months ago. The phone kept ringing, the texts kept coming, and each time I heard from someone, it felt like another reminder that we were the ones who had to make way for her. Another reminder that no one really cared about our grief, that our loss was just something to be swept under the rug for the sake of her happiness. It was suffocating. I remember one night, sitting on the couch, staring blankly at my phone. I had just read another message from an aunt, one that seemed harmless at first, asking how we were doing. But then she added, "I'm sure you're feeling better now that there's some good news in the family." The words made my blood run cold. I read them over and over again, trying to wrap my mind around what she was implying. Good news. Was that what this was now? A distraction from the sadness, a way to move on from our loss. My sister-in-law's pregnancy was good news, sure, but it didn't erase what we had lost. It didn't fill the empty space in my heart. I showed Roger the message, feeling a tear slip down my cheek as I handed him the phone. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen. I could see his jaw tighten, the way his fingers gripped the edges of the phone, as if he wanted to throw it across the room. I knew exactly how he felt. It was the same frustration, the same sense of helplessness. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he finally muttered, his voice raw. He wasn't talking about the phone calls or the messages. He was talking about everything, the grief, the betrayal, the loneliness. He was talking about his own silent battle, the one he hadn't shared with anyone because he didn't want to burden me. "I know," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I feel the same way." We spent the next few days in quiet isolation, trying to figure out how to navigate the aftermath of the family lunch, the hurtful words, and the overwhelming silence that had settled between us. We weren't arguing. We weren't even really talking. But it felt like we were drifting further apart, our connection fraying at the edges as the weight of everything bore down on us. Then came the invitation. It was a text from my sister-in-law, and when I saw her name pop up on the screen, my stomach clenched in instant dread. "Family lunch this weekend. We'd love for you and Roger to come." The message said, "It's really important for everyone to be together. Please let us know if you can make it." I stared at the text, my mind racing. The last thing I wanted to do was sit across from her, to smile and pretend like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just witnessed her claim the name of my lost child as her own. But I also knew that if we didn't go, the questions would start. The whispers, the disappointment. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she had won, of thinking she had gotten away with it. But at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to face her. I couldn't imagine sitting in that room, pretending like everything was fine, when it wasn't. Roger looked at me, his face tense, but he said nothing. We didn't need to talk about it. We both knew how we felt, but we also knew that avoiding it wouldn't make it go away. "We should go," he said finally, his voice soft, almost resigned. "Maybe it'll help. Maybe it'll give us some clarity." I nodded, my heart sinking. The last thing I wanted to do was show up at another family event, pretending to be happy, pretending to be okay. But what other choice did we have? We agreed to go. But even as we got dressed that morning, as we prepared to face the family again, I could feel the weight of the decision settle around us, pressing us down with every step we took. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had no idea just how hard it would be. We arrived, and at first, it seemed like any other family gathering. The same familiar faces, the same small talk, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Roger and I stuck to ourselves, barely speaking, just trying to get through it. We didn't know what to expect, but what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. As soon as my sister-in-law stood up, I knew something was coming. Her eyes scanned the room, and for just a second, everything seemed to stop. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. I felt Roger's hand tighten around mine as the words left her mouth. "I'm pregnant." The room erupted into cheers and applause. I couldn't breathe. I should have been happy for her, but all I could feel was this hollow ache in my chest. How could she? How could she stand there, in front of all of us, after what she had done? It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was everything. It was the way she had used our grief, our loss, as her stepping stone to the spotlight. It was the name. The name she'd claimed as if it were hers to take. It was the cruelty of it all, wrapped in a smile and a bow. Like it was a gift she was giving us. And in that moment, I knew things could never be the same. I felt my breath catch as my sister-in-law continued, smiling like she had just given the most thoughtful gift. The excitement in the room seemed to stretch out, but it felt like it was happening in slow motion for me. Everyone was congratulating her, clapping, celebrating, oblivious to the fact that just a few months ago we had lost a child. The child we'd been dreaming about. The child whose name was now being used, as if it didn't matter to us at all. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lash out, to stop everything, to make them see what they had just done. But instead, I stood there frozen. My hand still clutched Roger's, but I could feel the tightness in my chest as my heart raced. I could hear the voices around me, but all I could focus on was her, standing there, basking in the attention, completely unaware of the devastation she had just caused. The room continued to buzz with excitement, but I felt utterly detached from it all. I looked at Roger, trying to gauge how he was handling this, but his face was a mirror of mine, shocked, angry, and utterly hurt. His eyes were locked on his sister, but there was nothing warm in his gaze. He, too, was struggling to keep it together. Then, my sister-in-law did the unthinkable. She turned to me, her smile still wide, her eyes shining with false sweetness. "I thought it would be a nice gesture," she said, her voice too cheery. "You know, naming the baby after Mika. It's a way to keep her memory alive." I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My thoughts were jumbled, a blur of hurt and disbelief, a tribute. A tribute. It wasn't a tribute. It wasn't a kind gesture. It was a theft. She was stealing from us, using our grief as a stepping stone for her own joy. I could feel my chest tightening, my fists clenching at my sides. Roger squeezed my hand tighter, his own anger barely contained. I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch, the only sign that he was holding himself back. The words that came out of my mouth surprised me. "You didn't even ask us. You didn't even consider how we might feel about this." My sister-in-law blinked, as if the thought hadn't even occurred to her. "I thought it would be a comfort," she said, almost dismissively. "It's just a name that we had chosen." I shot back, my voice trembling with frustration. "You can't just take that from us." The smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "It's not a big deal. It's just a name. I thought you'd be happy about it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Happy? How could I be happy? My daughter's name was not a consolation prize. It wasn't something to be handed out like a token. It was everything we had dreamed about, everything we had hoped for. And now, she was using it to make herself look like the grieving hero, the one who was honoring our loss. "I'm not happy," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm not happy at all." Roger finally spoke, his voice tight, controlled but laced with anger. "What she means is, you didn't think this through. You didn't think about how this would hurt us. This isn't a tribute. This is you using our pain for your own gain." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room fell silent. My sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably, but the smile never left her face. "I didn't mean to upset you," she said, her voice faltering, but I could tell she wasn't truly sorry. It wasn't real. I thought it would be a nice way to honor her. "It's not," Roger said, his voice firm. "It's not honoring anything. It's making us feel like our loss doesn't matter." There was a long, tense silence, and I could feel every eye in the room on us. It was uncomfortable, like everyone was waiting for us to react, to say something more. But I couldn't. I didn't know what else to say. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, confusion, and a deep, aching sorrow that threatened to overwhelm me. The silence stretched on until my mother-in-law finally stood up. "This is all very unnecessary," she said, her voice filled with irritation. "You should appreciate what your sister is doing for you. She's trying to keep the memory of your daughter alive." I felt a flash of heat rise in my chest. Keep the memory alive. She hadn't even acknowledged our pain. Not really. She hadn't asked us how we felt about the name, about the gesture. It was all about her. About how she could use our loss to fill the void of her own happiness. "Don't tell me what I should appreciate," I said, my voice growing sharper. "This is not something I should be grateful for. This is something that should have never happened." My mother-in-law glanced at me with an expression of disbelief. "You're being overdramatic," she said, as if that explained everything. "It's just a name. Get over it." The words stung more than I thought they would. Overdramatic. That's how she saw me. That's how she saw my grief. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away. I wasn't going to cry in front of all these people. Not now, not over this. But the pain, the betrayal, it was too much. I wanted to scream, to make them understand just how deeply they had hurt us, but instead, I stood there in silence, my heart breaking into pieces. "Roger." Roger turned to me, his hand finding mine again. He didn't say anything, but the squeeze of his fingers around mine told me everything I needed to know. He was angry too. He was hurt too. And we were in this together. We couldn't change what had just happened. We couldn't undo the damage my sister-in-law had done by stealing our daughter's name. But we could stand up for ourselves. We could refuse to let them continue to treat us like our pain didn't matter. With a deep breath, I stood up. "We're leaving," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was still pounding in my chest. Roger didn't hesitate. He stood up beside me, his hand still holding mine. "Let's go." We didn't look back as we left the room, the silence following us out like a shadow. But as we stepped into the cool night air, I finally felt like I could breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was reclaiming something. Something that mattered. Something I wasn't going to let anyone take from me again. As the car door slammed shut behind us, I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the moment of peace, of control. We still had a long way to go, but for now, we had each other. And that, at least, was something worth holding on to. After that day, things changed between Roger and me. The silence between us didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt like a wall that was slowly growing higher. We were both retreating into ourselves, not because we didn't love each other, but because we didn't know how to handle the weight of everything that had happened. the pregnancy announcement, the name, the way it all felt like it was happening to us rather than with us. It was all too much. I thought I could find some peace in the quiet, in the absence of family gatherings, and the constant reminders of our grief. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, my sister-in-law, smiling like she had just done something noble, something kind. And it tore me apart every time. I wanted to believe that maybe it wasn't her intention to hurt us, but I couldn't. Not anymore. Then came the message. It was late one night, when Roger's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I was in the living room, staring out the window, when I heard him swear under his breath. He didn't need to say anything. I already knew it was from her. My sister-in-law. The one person who had just crossed a line I didn't think anyone could cross. I asked, though I wasn't sure if I even wanted to know. Roger stood still for a moment, his face hardening as he read the message. When he looked up, his eyes were full of that same anger I had seen the day of the lunch. "She wants to talk," he said, his voice tight. "She says she's sorry." Sorry. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even process the words. Sorry. After everything. The next day. After she'd just thrown our grief in our faces, after she'd taken something from us that we would never get back. She was sorry. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Roger looked at me, clearly torn. He wanted to respond, to do something, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He knew how deeply this hurt me. He knew how much I didn't want to confront her again. Not after everything. But I also saw the hurt in his eyes, the hurt that had been there since the moment she'd made that announcement. "What should we do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, the weight of everything that had happened, everything that still wasn't resolved. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't want to deal with her. Not yet." Roger nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know. But if she really is sorry, shouldn't we at least hear her out?" I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to give her the benefit of the doubt, to believe maybe she didn't understand the full impact of what she had done. But the other part of me, the part that had been crushed by her words, by her actions, couldn't let go of the anger. I don't know if I can," I said, my voice small. "I don't know if I can listen to her explain away everything she's done. It doesn't feel like an apology. It feels like an excuse." Roger's expression softened, and he walked over to me, sitting down beside me on the couch. He took my hand, and for a moment, we sat there in silence, letting the weight of the past few days settle around us. "I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything you're not ready for," he said quietly. "But I also don't want us to keep avoiding it. Not forever." I knew he was right. We couldn't just sweep it under the rug. It wasn't going away. But I also wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face her again, to let her make things right when I didn't even believe she fully understood what she'd done. "I just need time," I said, squeezing his hand. "Time to process all of this. Time to figure out if I can even forgive her." Roger nodded, his thumb brushing over my hand in a slow, comforting rhythm. "Take all the time you need. I'm with you, no matter what you decide." The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions, but nothing felt the same. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, of loss, of helplessness. It was like I was stuck in this place where everything felt like it was moving forward, but I was standing still, unable to catch up. And then came the phone call. It was from my sister-in-law. The last thing I wanted to do was pick up the phone. But I knew I had to. I knew that avoiding her, avoiding the truth of what had happened, wouldn't make it go away. "Hello?" I answered, my voice flat, unsteady. There was a long pause before she spoke. I know you're probably angry, and you have every right to be, she said, her voice quieter than usual. But I really need to apologize. I know I hurt you, and I never meant to. I don't know what came over me. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the way she was struggling to find the right words. It didn't feel like an apology. It felt like a justification. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to call her out on it just yet. I don't know if an apology will make a difference, I said, my words soft but firm. I don't know if I can just forgive you. She sighed. I understand. I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. And if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to say something, to finally get everything off my chest, to let her know how deeply she'd hurt me. But another part of me was exhausted. Exhausted from the anger, the pain, the constant feeling of being trapped in this never-ending cycle of betrayal. I'll think about it, I said quietly, and hung up before I could say anything else. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to process the conversation. It didn't feel like enough. It didn't feel like she understood. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. I didn't know what would come next. But I did know one thing. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet. And that was okay. It had to be. For now, all I could do was take things one step at a time. Roger and I spent the next few days in a daze. The tension between us was palpable, a constant undercurrent in our otherwise quiet home. Neither of us knew how to bridge the gap that had formed between us after the family lunch. The betrayal felt too raw, too personal, to just brush aside, and yet we couldn't talk about it. Not yet. I could see how much it was eating away at him. Roger was a man of few words, but the silence between us had become suffocating. Every time I looked at him, I saw the weight of it all. His frustration, his anger, his pain. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to make it better, but there was no way to fix this. Not right now. And so, we stayed in our bubble. We went about our days, tried to keep busy. But every so often, I would catch him looking at his phone, his jaw tight, as if he were holding back something. Something he couldn't let go of. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It wasn't her number that flashed on the screen. It was Roger's father. I could tell from the moment he picked up that something was different. There was an urgency in his voice when he answered. Ed. Roger's tone was cautious, like he didn't know what to expect. I could barely make out the conversation, but it was enough to know what was coming. Roger's dad was calling about my sister-in-law. He had finally reached out, wanting to talk. Roger's father, the one who had been quiet through all of this, had decided it was time to address the situation. When Roger hung up the phone, he didn't look at me right away. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes distant. He wants to apologize, Roger said finally, his voice low, almost exhausted. He says that he's sorry for everything that happened, that he doesn't want this tearing us apart. I nodded, though the words didn't quite hit me the way they should have. Does he know what she did? I asked softly, my voice breaking slightly as I thought about the name. Roger sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He doesn't know everything. I don't think he really understands the full extent of it. But he's sorry for how his family treated us. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to believe that his apology meant something, that maybe we could begin to heal. But another part of me felt too betrayed, too hurt to even consider forgiveness. What good was an apology when the damage had already been done? What good was any of it when we were still left picking up the pieces of a broken trust? Roger turned to me, his expression vulnerable. He said we should meet. He wants to talk in person. I didn't answer right away. My mind was still spinning from everything. The thought of facing his family again, of sitting down and pretending that everything was fine, made me feel physically ill. But as I looked at Roger, I saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the same uncertainty I felt. Maybe we had to do this. Maybe it was the only way to move forward. I don't know if I can. I whispered, the words heavy in my mouth. Roger's face softened. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We'll go when you're ready. That was the problem. I wasn't sure I would ever be ready. We spent the next few days not talking much about the meeting. The tension between us remained, thick and unspoken. Roger made it clear that he's willing to do whatever it took to fix things, but I wasn't sure how to fix it. How could we fix something that had been broken so completely? And then, out of nowhere, another message arrived. This one was from my sister-in-law. I've been thinking, the message started. And I just wanted to say again how sorry I am for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you, I really didn't. Please, let's talk. I want to make this right. I stared at the message for a long time, the words almost mocking me. How could she say that? How could she say? She didn't mean to hurt us when everything she did felt like an intentional wound. I handed the phone to Roger, his eyes scanning the message. He didn't say anything at first, just took a deep breath before looking at me. Do you want to respond? He asked gently, though I could hear the edge in his voice. I said firmly, I don't want to respond, not yet. Roger nodded, his eyes heavy with unspoken words. I knew he wanted to fix this. He wanted to believe that there was still a way to heal the rift, that we could somehow move forward. But I didn't know how. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The days passed in a blur of silence. Each message from her, each reminder of what had happened, pushed me further away from the idea of reconciliation. I didn't want to be the bigger person anymore. I didn't want to be the one who tried to make peace when she had already taken so much from us. Then, a week later, Roger's father called again. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. He was coming to our house to talk. We need to do this, Roger said, his voice steady but uncertain. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. The idea of sitting across from my sister-in-law's enabler, facing the family that had ignored my pain for so long, was almost too much to bear. But Roger needed this. He needed closure. And maybe, just maybe, we could both find some peace in whatever conversation was to come. I'm not ready. I said the words feeling foreign in my mouth. But the truth was I wasn't sure I ever would be. Roger reached for my hand, his touch warm and grounding. We don't have to do it all at once. We'll take it one step at a time. I nodded, the weight of everything still pressing down on me. But for the first time in a while, I felt like I wasn't carrying it alone. The morning of the meeting with Roger's father came faster than I expected. For days, I tried to push the thoughts of it away, hoping somehow it would all just disappear. But as the time drew closer, there was no avoiding it. The weight of everything, the grief, the betrayal, the silence between us, pressed down on me harder than ever. Roger had been quiet that morning, his movements slow as he got ready. I could see the tension in the way he moved, the way his hands shook slightly as he poured his coffee. He didn't want to do this any more than I did, but we both knew it was something that had to be done. We don't have to do this, I said, breaking the silence. I could feel my voice wavering, the uncertainty creeping in. We can still back out. We don't have to face them yet. Roger turned to me, his eyes soft but resolute. We're not backing out. We can't keep running from this. We have to face it, even if it's hard. I nodded, though the words didn't settle in my heart. It wasn't about facing the family. It wasn't about dealing with the mess they had created. It was about whether I could ever let go of the anger, whether I could ever forgive what had happened, or if I would be stuck in this endless cycle of hurt and resentment. I felt the weight of the past few weeks in the pit of my stomach, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want Roger to think I wasn't strong enough to face this. So, I stood up straighter, squared my shoulders, and took a deep breath. "Let's get this over with," I said, more to myself than to him. We drove in silence. The car felt too small, too close, like every inch of space between us was filled with the unsaid words, the unresolved tension. I kept my gaze out the window, watching the world go by in a blur, but nothing felt right. Nothing felt normal. Roger pulled into his father's driveway, and the car came to a stop with a slight jolt. I looked over at him, and for the first time in days, he met my eyes. His expression was a mixture of resolve and uncertainty, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "You ready?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost unsure. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My heart was pounding too hard in my chest, and all I could think about was how much had changed in such a short time. How everything had felt like it was slipping out of my control. "I'm scared," I whispered, barely audible, even to myself. Roger reached over, his hand finding mine. "I know. But whatever happens, we're in this together." I squeezed his hand, trying to hold on to that reassurance. Trying to remember that I wasn't alone. I wasn't facing this by myself. We walked up to the door together, and I felt the air shift around me. It was as though every step we took toward the house made the walls grow taller, pressing down on me. The door opened, before we even had a chance to knock, and there stood Roger's father, looking at us, with a mixture of hope and guilt in his eyes. "I'm glad you came," he said softly, stepping aside to let us in. "Please, sit down." The living room felt too quiet, too empty. The silence between us was thick, oppressive. We sat down, and Roger's father settled into the armchair across from us, his hands resting in his lap. I could see the weariness in his face, the lines that had deepened over the years. He looked older somehow, more tired than I remembered. "I just want to start by saying I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I know I haven't been there for you. I haven't done enough, and I should have. I didn't understand what you were going through. I didn't understand the pain you both felt." I looked at him, not sure how to respond. His apology didn't feel like enough. It felt like a half-hearted attempt to fix something that couldn't be fixed with words. "You don't understand," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You don't understand what it feels like to lose something so precious, something you've dreamed about for years. You don't understand how it feels to have your grief dismissed, to have your pain ignored." Roger's father flinched at the harshness of my tone, but he didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to his hands. "I know I didn't understand," he said, his voice thick. "But I'm trying now. I've heard enough. I've seen enough to know that I've failed you both. And I'm truly sorry for that." I wanted to feel something: anger, relief, even forgiveness, but all I could feel was numb. His apology wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. It wasn't enough to make me forget the way his wife and daughter had treated us, the way they had made our pain into their own personal drama. "I don't know if I can forgive her," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever forgive what they did to us." Roger's father nodded again, his eyes soft with understanding. "I don't expect you to forgive her. Not yet? Not right away. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm sorry for everything." I could see that he was trying, but it still felt like too little. Too late. His apology, while sincere, couldn't undo the hurt. It couldn't take back the words that had been said, the damage that had been done. Roger's hand tightened on mine, and I could feel the warmth of his touch, the reassurance that, no matter what happened with his family, we would get through this together. But even that didn't feel like enough. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive my sister-in-law, or my mother-in-law for that matter. I wasn't sure if I could ever move past the hurt. But in that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about them. It wasn't about them at all. It was about me. It was about how I moved forward from this, how I learned to let go of the anger that had been eating away at me. I don't know what comes next, I said, my voice steadier than before. But I do know that I'm not ready to let go of this. Not yet. Roger's father didn't say anything more. He just nodded, his eyes filled with regret. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was something. And for now, that had to be enough. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Roger and I had spent so much time in emotional turmoil, trying to process everything that had happened. And now, we were slowly finding our rhythm again. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. But there was something different now. There was an understanding between us, an unspoken bond that grew stronger every day. I could still feel the weight of what had happened, the sting of the betrayal, but it was starting to fade, little by little. Roger and I hadn't fully forgiven his sister, or his mother, and maybe we never would, but we were learning to move forward, without carrying that anger with us. We were learning to create new memories, ones that weren't tainted by the past, and that was something, at least, we hadn't heard from my sister-in-law, or my mother-in-law since that day, and I wasn't sure what to expect when the phone rang one afternoon. The voice on the other end was unexpected. It was Roger's father again. I just wanted to check in, he said, his voice sounding a little hesitant. How are you both doing? I wasn't sure how to answer how were we doing. We were surviving. We were healing. But we still hadn't fully processed everything. Not yet. Still, I appreciated the call. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like someone genuinely cared. We're getting there, Roger said, his voice steady. Thanks for asking. There was a pause before his father spoke again. I know I haven't been the best at showing it, but I want you both to know that I'm here for you. I'm not going to let this break our family apart. We're stronger than that. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but something inside me resisted. Was it enough? Could we truly heal the way he seemed to think we could? I didn't know, but hearing him say it helped, even if just a little. It was the first time since all of this started that I felt like there was a chance for something resembling peace. You've already apologized, I said softly. But I think we need time to figure out what comes next. Roger's father agreed, and we ended the call with a quiet understanding. There was no magic solution, no immediate fix to everything that had been broken. But there was room for growth, for forgiveness, if not yet for full reconciliation. Later that night, Roger and I sat on the couch, our fingers intertwined. It had been a long road to this point, and there was still so much left to navigate. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we could get through this together. I think I'm ready to move forward, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Roger looked at me, his eyes filled with love and understanding. I'm with you, wherever that takes us. And that was enough. More than enough. The next few months passed by in a blur. There were still difficult moments, still days where I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. But there were also moments of peace. We took time to heal. We rebuilt our lives together, bit by bit. And in the quiet moments, I found myself thinking less about the pain, about what had been taken from us, and more about what we still had, each other, the love we shared, and the future that was still ahead. We didn't go back to the family gatherings right away. We needed time to process everything, to decide if we were ready to face them again. But we did start to rebuild our lives on our own terms. We made new traditions, created new memories, and slowly began to heal from the inside out. In the end, the journey wasn't about finding a perfect resolution. It wasn't about forgiving those who had hurt us. It was about learning to live with the pain, learning to move forward, and finding peace in our own way. And that was something I could hold on to. For now, that was enough.